this is Faith at Faith&books, and as you might guess, I'm a little bit under the weather. I don't know if it's COVID. I'm going to go get tested again. I got tested once already, but according to the CDC protocols, it was too soon after exposure, and I tested negative. So I don't know if I'm just come down with a cold at the same time that my son got diagnosed with COVID, or if I really have COVID and I just got a negative because I tested too early, or maybe it was just a false reading. Anyway, so I haven't been feeling so good, but I did manage to finish this book, Earth User's Guide to Permaculture. I was reading it and trying to make videos relating what I was learning, trying to summarize it during Nonfiction November. And I didn't finish it, and I don't know, life gets ahead of me, and I can't, best made plans. Anyway, I finished it last night at about 12:15, so I didn't quite make it by midnight, New Year's Eve, but I did finish it. So I'm very proud that I did that, and I really, really am so intrigued by permaculture, its whole approach to everything. I mean, it's not just about gardening. It's about looking at all life as this integrated system and how we have to approach it ethically, and we have to establish our ethics, and then we have to figure out a design system that will promote the flourishing of those ethics. So it's quite, it's quite philosophical and at the same time very practical. And it takes, its foundation is about working with nature and trying to work with nature instead of against nature in providing for human needs, but not at the expense of the natural world, not at the expense of our environment. And so I had worked up, I think, to chapter 16. So I'd done zone 0, which is your home, your house. And then zone 1 was like the kitchen garden. I'm trying to remember now. Zone 2, I'm getting it now. I'm forgetting. I know, what was zone 3? Was that? Because some of the zones to me kind of blurred together. Oh, okay. Zone 3 was if you were farming. So basically, it's how to deal with your property, how to deal with your space on Earth. And it even goes into how to do this in an urban situation, how to do this in your office. But anyway, I left off, I think, after chapter 15. So chapter 16 is harvest forests. So these are forests that you're going to use for timber and other things that people can use. And it talks about designing that. Let's see, the design aims to keep 30 to 35% of all land permanently tree covered. Goes into how important trees are for the functioning of the whole planet. So it goes into that. How what are the best practices for maintaining forests, where we're using things that we harvest from it. So it goes quite into it. Animals that you can raise in forests, all sorts of things. Let's see. I mean, it's so much of it is about planning too. So there's lots and lots of diagrams. Let's see, reclaiming forests. How do you make forests healthy that aren't healthy? Let's see, I underlined various things. Mimic nature when planting. Establishing your indigenous forests will be more successful if you mimic nature. Instead of planting climax species, so species that, the ecosystem has been developing in a really healthy way, and once it's fully developed, you have your climax species. But before that, you have sort of pioneer species that can go in and through their root system, they fix the soil and they prepare it for the climax species. Really interesting stuff. I mean, I just got the bear the bare minimum. I just gathered that much. It's something you have to keep studying. And then the next chapter is on other cultures and places, like how other cultures have done things. And she uses, because this book, the author is from Australia, lots of examples are from Australia, but she also lived in Vietnam for a long time, and she also draws from other places too. So the different cultures have figured out how to work things. Not everybody is like us, where we just go in and tear everything down and, just assume that we can, mine and exploit all we want and not worry about the consequences. Other cultures have developed systems and rhythms that are much healthier and much more in tune with the natural world. So here she's got, this was an example from Vietnam. Can you see that? Here I'm sitting in my bed. Let's see, and then chapter 19 was permaculture at the office, store, and grocery. No, wait, factory, not grocery, factory. So just little things you can do. How you might be like the low man on the totem pole, but there are certain actions that you can take to sort of start to get people to think about these things and get them to want to participate and do things. What I like about the book is it has these very clear strategies that I would never have thought of. And so it's very clever that way. Adding resilience to design. So this was interesting. I never thought about this, but they're almost like preppers. Like they really think that, disasters happen. That's part of life. And you shouldn't just assume they're never going to happen. And so, and it's part of taking care of your community and even like the animals and the plants and everything. If you've thought through what might happen and how you would save the most people as soon as possible and that sort of thing. So it's almost like a prepper mentality, but not like maybe the extreme preppers, but just the common sense planning. And again, it has to do with human flourishing and us flourishing in the world, in the natural world. So she goes through all the different kinds of disasters, floods, droughts, cyclones. She's got these long lists of different things you should do to prepare for various disasters. And in this one, she really emphasizes coming together as a community, plan with the people who live around you so that you have, so everyone knows what to do. Then the next one, this one I really tried to read closely, and I think I'm going to reread it. It's Managing Pests. Because in my garden, I have a food forest area that it's just starting off and it's kind of shaky. But I have raised vegetable beds, and what happens is so many weeds get in there that I haven't been having very successful gardening. So I want to figure out healthy ways and ways to deal with all these weeds coming in, because they have a different approach to weeds. They don't really see weeds as these evil things that we do. They're just plants, and a lot of times they go in where no other plant can really. It's a sign that your soil maybe isn't so healthy, because a lot of the weeds go in where other plants wouldn't survive, and the weeds can actually like help promote the soil or bring in pollinators and that sort of thing. So weeds are just plants that we don't want. We don't want them to overtake the food that we want to raise. So anyway, I think I'm going to read this one again, because a lot of really interesting ideas on how to approach it without having to resort to herbicides or insecticides. So that was a good one. Integrated Pet Management it's called. And then I really like this one, Living with Wildlife, because they don't have the same competitive perspective. They have a different, wildlife deserves to be there, and you just have to figure out how to share the bounty of what you're growing. And so it's very friendly towards animals, with very practical things that you can do, and just almost to make wildlife be sort of your ally. Like if you bring in birds that will eat aphids or something like that, then, or aphids, how do you say that? I always say that wrong. that sort of thing. Um, you can try to attract the right kind of wildlife that would help you. Then in chapter 23, it's weeds. And this is another one that I'm going to read again. Weeds, guardians of the soil. Yeah, integrated pest management has to do with insects and that sort of thing. And then this one was on weeds. So in my head, I mixed those two together because those are the two things that I'm dealing with in my garden. Yeah, so here she has questions to ask about weeds. She said you should really know what kind of weeds are in your garden because that will really tell you about the health of your garden. So why is this weed here? Is it carrying out valuable functions to protect or restore the land? What is its life cycle? How fast is it spreading? When is it important to work on controlling it? Mark the time period on your calendar. What is the best strategy and do you have the tools and means to do it? So yeah, so that's another chapter I'm going to reread. Let's see, and then chapter 24 was aquaculture, which I had not really thought that much about. Very interesting about establishing ponds in your property and then growing the best fish that are sort of native to your area that would be good eating, and you would avoid a lot of pollutants because right now we're overfishing and seafood or fish has mercury in it or other, it's not, now the microplastics they're finding in fish. So how can we, eat healthy fish and not overfish? And so that was what that chapter was all about. And that's, I'm never gonna, well, actually, maybe I could. It would be kind of neat to make a little pond. There shows a little tire pond, using an old tire, making just a little pond that way. And water itself helps control extremes of temperatures. So if it's really cold, it makes it a little warmer, and if it's too hot, it makes it a little cooler. And then she talks about social permaculture. This topic is really, really fascinating to me. How can we figure out how to, because this just seems too hard. This is the thing that always puzzles me. How do we make economics be more earth and human friendly? Like right now, it's friendly to really rich people and just consumerism, just exploit the earth and produce more and more and more goods, whether you need them or not, whether it makes you happy or not, because we all have to have this income, right? Except except these big corporations export everything to countries where there's, not the same kind of labor laws. So we are involved in these economic systems where, people are, I'm talking on this phone, and for all I know, slaves help make this phone, or they mine the minerals for it, or whatever. Or some people, in China working in some horrible factory. I don't want to be involved in that. So how do you change it? The system seems so vast and so overwhelming, and I feel so tiny and so, it seems so attenuated. But they've really thought this out about how we could switch things, how we could change our culture. And I found it really interesting, really, really interesting, because it really ties in a lot with Catholic social teaching, just coincidentally. I don't think they're Catholic at all. I think it's completely secular. But it ties in with that, and it also ties in with a little bit with like G.K. Chesterton's distributivism, if you've ever heard of that, which it's kind of a half-cocked economic theory that doesn't quite make sense the way he formulated it. But I feel like they're more on top of things when it comes to the actual economics. But she says here, understanding money, how it's earned and where it goes, is fundamental to good permaculture practices. Formal economics theory is frighteningly limited and dishonest about real costs. Even my husband, who studied economics and finance, says this. Until the late 20th century, economics ignored the cost of producing goods, especially non-renewable resources. So, and he always says, good economics would be that, say, Coca-Cola, who the largest plastic polluter on the earth, should have to pay for the cost of that pollution, but they don't. It gets pushed off on consumers, and then we have to, our municipalities have to decide, well, how are we going to get rid of this plastic? And it becomes all these other people's problems when Coca-Cola, and the petroleum industry are creating the problem, and they're the polluters, and yet they're making this huge profit because they're not taking responsibility for the harm they're doing. And so, and they say here, this is true for capitalism as well as communism. Every natural resource was free and up for grabs and available to be exploited, often resulting in great human misery. So we got to get away from that. And I really found this super interesting because that is something that's really bothered me. How do we get away from this extractive economy and into something that is more human-centered or family-centered? And talks about investments, how, you should invest ethically. You have to always think about the further repercussions of your actions. So I found that really interesting. And then a sense of place. And this is the thing that really reminded me of G.K. Chesterton, because he's very much about local. You have solidarity, which is just solidarity with everybody, right? But then you have a subsidiarity, which is you deal with the problems that you have in the place where you are. And in permaculture, they call it your bioregion. So you'll have natural, it's kind of the opposite of globalization. You have natural defining characteristics of certain places. And all those people have that in common. And that's what helps create community, because they have to respond to the specific problems that come up in their areas, the specific challenges, the specific resources that they have, all that sort of thing. And that's how humans evolved, to have these regional cultural things going on, and so societies. And so we should get back to that, because that really it will help everything globally if we're more concerned with things regionally, so in these bioregions. And so then it talks about living in communities, villages, suburbs, and cities. Talks about applying permaculture designs for rural areas, suburbs, and urban areas. And that's it. That was the end of the book. So I found it really fascinating, kind of life-changing, or kind of mind-shifting. Your whole what's the word I want? It really changes the way you view things. And I want to keep learning more about it. And maybe this year I'm really gonna, because I'm trying to focus so much on my garden and turning my yard into just a healing place on the earth. This little patch of land I've got, I'm gonna try and make it support life, support diversity, support just all the complex, marvelous things that go on in nature all around us that we don't even think about, and we're hurting all the time because we just don't consider it. And so that's what I'm going to try and do with my little patch. And so I want to keep learning more about this. The technical part of it just kind of goes over my head. I think I would need to be in a classroom and have a live teacher teach me. I think I would still struggle, but I love the concepts. Absolutely love the concepts. It just totally speaks to my heart. So I highly recommend, if you want to learn about permaculture, I highly recommend reading this manual. It really is like a workbook or a textbook or a manual. And really interesting, really deep stuff. You could read this thing over and over and get something out of it every time. So, I've talked for 19 minutes, so I better go now. But Happy New Year, and I didn't make a video for my 12 Days of Christmas because I gave the book to the boy and he took it. So I don't have it with me to show. I might just wait till the end of the 12 days now, because we're on day 8, right? Day 8 of Christmas. Because everything's topsy-turvy because of the COVID stuff and being in quarantine and me not feeling well. My husband's not feeling well either. So, anyway, All right, but I hope you are doing well. Happy reading, happy new year, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.